The footage was only 40 seconds long. The council had watched it 11 times on the screen. Something enormous moved through a grain storage complex on Solta 4 like it was walking through tall grass. The structure had been rated to withstand Category 6 storm pressure. The creature hit the outer wall once, and the wall ceased to exist. Storage containers the size of cargo trucks were tossed aside. The ground cracked under its weight. And then it stopped in the middle of the wreckage, lifted its head, and made a sound that the recording equipment had partially distorted. Because the full frequency had damaged the mic, then it simply stood there. Not feeding, not fleeing, just standing in the rubble it had made. Ambassador Dale turned off the screen. The council chamber stayed quiet for a moment. "That is the fourth major structure destroyed in 9 days," he said. "The colony has been evacuated. 12,000 residents displaced." Commander Brevik's forces engaged the creature on day 3. They lasted 6 minutes before being ordered to fall back. One of the council representatives, a tall, blue-skinned Yulari elder, leaned forward. "And the military option remains off the table. Heavy bombardment would work," Dale said. "It would also destroy the water basin that supplies 4 other colonies downstream. So yes, off the table." Another silence. The Vorith, that was the species name, buried in old Drelkai Empire records, had been engineered for war. Not bred, engineered. The Drelkai had taken a large predatory animal from their frontier worlds and spent 2 generations rebuilding it from the inside. Heavier bone, reinforced hide, neural implants for remote command, chemical regulators to keep it aggressive, controllable, and alive in harsh conditions. Then the Drelkai Empire had collapsed under its own internal conflicts 3 years ago. Their war beasts had been abandoned mid-deployment. Some died without their chemical maintenance. Some were quietly captured by scavengers. This one had wandered for 3 years across the outer sectors and had now, for reasons no one fully understood, decided that Solta 4 was where it wanted to be. "We have reviewed every option available to us," Dale said. He brought up a second screen, a species file, "and we have settled on an unconventional proposal." The file read, "Human, Earth origin, species class. Tier 3 developing." A few representatives shifted in their seats. "Humans," the Yulari elder said flatly. "Specifically 1 human," Dale said. "A veterinarian." The word did not translate cleanly into all languages present. Dale had anticipated this. On their home world, he explained, humans developed a field of medicine dedicated entirely to healing animals. Not animals that can describe their symptoms or consent to treatment. Animals that cannot communicate in any recognized language. Animals that are sometimes large enough to kill the person treating them. He paused. They also domesticated the apex predators of their planet. For companionship. Voluntarily. The room was quiet again, but in a different way. Their largest land predators, one representative said slowly. They kept them. As pets. As family members, Dale said. Yes. He pulled up a second record. A name. A work history. Field notes from 6 years working with large wildlife. Elephants, rhinoceroses, big cats, coastal predators. Notes from a research post studying animal behavior in conflict zones. A list of published work on reading pain signals in nonverbal creatures. Dr. Nora Reed, age 41, currently running a small wildlife clinic outside a city called Durban. She was not our first choice, Dale said honestly. She was our last one. On Earth, at that moment, Nora was elbow-deep in a procedure. The patient was a white rhinoceros named Gerald. Not her name for him. That had been the sanctuary staff's doing, and Gerald had a deep tissue infection in his left hindquarter that had gone unnoticed for too long. Nora had been working for 2 hours. She had 2 more to go. Her assistant handed her a different instrument. She took it without looking up. "You have a call," her assistant said. "They've called 4 times. Tell them to leave a message. They say it's the Galactic Council." Nora's hands kept moving. "Tell them to leave a detailed message." They did. She listened to it 2 hours later, sitting on a crate outside the surgical bay, still in her work clothes, eating a cold sandwich. She listened to the whole thing once. Then she played the attached footage. 40 seconds. A massive creature. The grain depot. the sound that bent the microphone. She watched the creature stop in the middle of the wreckage. She watched it stand there. She replayed that part. "You're not eating it," she said quietly to no one she called back. A very relieved council aide answered on the first ring and began explaining the urgency of the situation. Nora let him finish. "I need full biological scans if you have them," she said. "Movement logs, feeding observations, anything survivors recorded. And I want to bring my own equipment. I'll send you the list. Don't substitute anything. I need exactly what's on it." The aide hesitated. "Dr. Reed, do you understand the scale of I understand it's in pain?" Nora said. "That's enough to start. When does the transport leave?" She was on it the next morning with 2 large equipment cases, a field medical kit built for animals 10 times her size, and a thermos of coffee that she finished somewhere over the outer belt. She spent the entire journey reading every piece of existing Vorth biology she could find. There was not much, but it was enough to form a first theory. And her first theory was not, "This creature is a monster." Her first theory was, "Something inside it is broken, and it has been broken for a very long time." Solta 4 smelled like dry grain and burnt metal. Nora stepped off the transport ramp and felt the heat first, dry, heavy, the kind that sits on the skin. Then she noticed the silence. 12,000 people had lived here 2 weeks ago. Now the landing area held 3 council military vehicles, a row of temporary shelters, and a lot of empty space where a working colony used to be. Commander Brevik was waiting at the edge of the landing pad. He was broad, silver-haired, and had the look of someone who had already decided this meeting was a waste of his time. He glanced at Nora's equipment cases, then at her, and said nothing that counted as a greeting. "Where are the movement logs?" Nora asked. Brevik looked at Ambassador Dale, who had come down the ramp behind her. Dale gave a small, apologetic gesture that seemed to mean, "Just answer her." "Command tent," Brevik said, "but I'd like to walk you through our tactical assessment first. My team has 6 days of direct observation. We know this creature's range, its aggression triggers, I'll read the tactical report," Nora said. "Movement logs first, and feeding observations." Brevik's jaw moved slightly. "It doesn't feed. That's in the report." "I know. That's why I want the logs." She picked up one of her equipment cases and started walking toward the command tent. After a moment, Brevik followed. Dale followed Brevik, looking slightly relieved that she was at least moving in the right direction. The command tent was large and climate-controlled. Screens covered one wall, showing Grath's current position from a long-range drone. The council had learned quickly not to send anything closer than 2 kilometers. The creature was near the water basin, moving slowly in a wide circle, but a young Soltari was sitting in the corner of the tent, wrapped in a blanket despite the heat outside, watching the screens. He looked up when Nora came in. "Who are you?" she asked. "Yoon," he said. "I stayed." Dale stepped forward. He refused evacuation. His family's farm is in Grath's current range. "We've been trying to relocate him, but he's been watching it for days," Nora said. She looked at Yoon. "What have you seen?" Yoon sat up slightly, surprised to be asked. "It circles the water a lot, but it barely drinks. It pushes against buildings, not to break them, more like leaning. The left side, mostly." He paused. "And it makes sounds at night. Not roaring. Something quieter. It took me a while to figure out it was the same creature." Nora set her case down and opened it. "The left side," she said. "Which part of the left side?" "The shoulder. High up." She pulled out a tablet and started making notes. Brevik watched this with visible skepticism. "The creature destroyed 4 structures, nearly killed 2 of my soldiers. And you're asking a local boy what he saw? He's been closer to it longer than anyone else here," Nora said, not looking up. "That makes his observations more valuable than your drone footage." She glanced at Yoon. "Have you seen it eat anything?" "Anything at all?" "No. It broke open the storage buildings. But it didn't touch what was inside." Nora nodded slowly. She pulled up Grath's movement logs on the nearest screen and spent the next 20 minutes reading through them. Nobody spoke. Brevik tried once, and Dale touched his arm quietly. When she finished, she turned around. "It's not attacking," she said. Brevik stared at her. "It killed. It destroyed structures. The casualties from your soldiers were from the response engagement, not from unprovoked attack. Has it gone after any individual person who wasn't already moving toward it fast? A pause. No. But has it pursued anyone who retreated calmly? Another pause. Longer. No. It's circling the water because it's thirsty, but it can't drink properly. It's leaning on buildings because something in its left shoulder is causing it constant pain. It's not eating because whatever is regulating its appetite has been malfunctioning for so long that the signal is gone. She looked back at the screen where Grath moved slowly in its wide, tired loop. The Drelkai put hardware inside this animal to control it. That hardware has been breaking down for 3 years. Some of it is probably infected. Some of it is probably grinding against bone or nerve tissue every time it moves. The tent was quiet. It's not a rampaging weapon, Nora said. It's a large animal in chronic pain that doesn't understand why it hurts. And every time something loud or fast comes at it, the pain spikes and it reacts. That's not aggression. That's a defensive pain response. Yun was looking at her with wide eyes. Can you fix it? I don't know yet, she said. I need to get closer. Brevik straightened. Absolutely not. The risk, I'm not asking permission, Nora said, not unkindly. I'm telling you my plan so you don't send soldiers after me and make things worse. She looked at Yun. You know the terrain between here and the water basin? Yun nodded. Good. You're with me in the morning. She spent the rest of the evening reviewing everything she had. Old Drelkai biological records, partial and badly translated. The movement logs. Yun's observations. What she knew about pain behavior in large nonverbal animals and how it mapped to the footage she had watched 11 times on the transport. The patterns were clear to her. She had seen versions of this before. Not in alien war beasts, but in animals that had been used hard and then left with no care and no way to ask for help. They always looked like monsters from a distance, not up close. They just looked tired. The sun on Solta 4 came up fast. One moment the plains were dark and cool. The next the light was everywhere and the heat was already building. Nora and Yun left the command post before anyone else was fully awake. She had one equipment case and a long-range scanner worn across her back like a backpack. Yun had a small pack with water and a local comm unit. 2 of Brevik's soldiers had been assigned to follow them, which Nora had argued against and lost. She accepted the compromise. Soldiers stay 50 meters behind. No weapons drawn, no movement unless she signals. Yun led her along the dry edge of a shallow ridge that wrapped around the eastern side of the water basin. They moved low and slow. He had done this before. She could tell from how naturally he moved, where he placed his feet, how he knew without looking which patches of ground would shift and make noise. You watched it every day, Nora asked quietly as they walked. Every day, Yun said. At first I was scared. Then I started noticing things. Like what? Like how it never went toward the residential area. The houses are south of the basin. It never went south. It just kept circling the same ground near the water and the grain storage. He paused. My father always said, animals that look angry are usually afraid. I kept thinking about that. Nora glanced at him. Your father sounds like a smart man. He was a farmer. But yes. They stopped at the top of the ridge. Below, about 300 meters out, Grath was visible. And even from that distance, even knowing what it had done to those buildings, it was something to see that IT was enormous. Easily 12 meters at the shoulder. The hide was dark gray-green and looked less like skin and more like overlapping plates, rough and uneven, built up over years of scar tissue and natural growth. The head was broad and low, carried slightly forward of the shoulders as if the neck was always braced for weight. For thick legs, a tail that moved in slow, unconscious sweeps. And on the left shoulder, even from here, Nora could see the irregularity. The hide there was darker, more inflamed looking. The shoulder sat slightly lower than the right. When Grath moved, there was a faint compensation in its stride, a micro-adjustment, so practiced it had become automatic. The animal had been walking around that pain for so long it no longer knew it was doing it. Nora activated her scanner and started a slow, systematic sweep. The scanner was built for large wildlife. She had modified it over years for better tissue depth reading. It was quiet and emitted nothing Grath would register as a threat. She worked for an hour. Grath moved, circled, stopped to lean the bad shoulder against a ruined wall structure, pushed lightly, and then moved on. The lean was brief, barely 10 seconds, but it happened 4 times in the hour she watched. Counter pressure, Nora murmured, marking it in her notes. It's trying to relieve the pressure itself. The scanner started building a picture. Dense metallic masses along the upper spine and neck. Implant hardware, heavy and old. One mass near the left shoulder joint was distinctly irregular. The scanner flagged it as fragmented. A piece had broken internally, and the broken edge was sitting against what the scanner estimated was major connective tissue. Every time Grath moved its left leg significantly, walking, turning, pushing against something, that fragment moved too. Every step, Nora said quietly. Every single step. For how long? Yin looked at her. Is it bad? It's very bad. And the infection indicators around 2 of the spinal implants are high. The tissue is reacting. The body is trying to fight something it can't remove. She lowered the scanner. 3 years. It has been dealing with this for 3 years. Behind them, one of the soldiers shifted position. Dry ground crackled under a boot. Grath's head came up instantly. The soldiers froze. Nora didn't move at all. She just stayed exactly where she was at the top of the ridge, completely still. Grath turned its full body toward the sound. The eyes, dark, set wide in the broad head, scanned the ridge line. Nora could feel the weight of that attention from 300 meters away. It was not like being watched by something unintelligent. There was focus in it. There was calculation. Then one of the soldiers made a decision. Nora heard the weapon power up behind her. Non-lethal deterrent, standard council issue, and had exactly 1 second to say don't before the shot went off. The sound hit Grath like a physical thing. It flinched, a full-body flinch, the bad shoulder jerking. And then the pain response came right behind it, and Grath came forward fast, covering ground at a speed that made Nora's brain briefly insist it wasn't possible for something that large to move that way. It hit the base of the ridge wall and tore through the lower structure of an old supply station, wood and composite panels going everywhere, and then stopped, chest heaving. The 2 soldiers had already run. Nora had not. She was still standing at the top of the ridge. Still, breathing carefully. Grath was below her now, close enough that she could hear the sound of its breathing. Rough, uneven, punctuated by a low sound she had been watching for in the audio records. Not a growl. Something between a groan and a rumble. Pain vocalization. She had heard similar sounds from elephants. Grath's eyes found her. Stayed. Nora did not step back. She did not raise her hands. She just stayed where she was and looked back. After a long moment, Grath turned and walked away. Slowly this time. The compensating limp was visible in every step. Nora finally exhaled. She keyed her calm. Nobody fires anything near this animal again, she said. That's not a request. Brevik's voice came back taut and controlled. Understood. She watched Grath move back toward the basin. Then she opened her notes and started writing. She had everything she needed to begin. Nora spent the next day not going anywhere near Grath. This confused everyone. Dale asked twice if she needed anything. Brevik stopped himself from asking, but the question was visible on his face every time he looked at her. Yoon just watched and waited, which told Nora he understood instinctively even if he couldn't have explained why. She spent the day at the work table in the corner of the command tent. The scanner data was on one screen. Old Drelkai biological notes, partial, badly translated by Council archives, full of gaps, were on another. She was building a calming compound from what she had brought, adjusted for what she now knew about Vorth biology. Not full sedation. Full sedation on an animal this size, with an unknown reaction to the compounds she had available, with broken hardware already causing system stress. That was how you killed a patient. She needed something lighter. Something that would take the edge off the constant pain signal without dropping Grath's motor function or triggering a panic response from the sudden change in body chemistry. She had done versions of this before for different animals in different circumstances. The principle was always the same. You do not sedate something into helplessness and then expect it to trust you. You reduce the pain enough that the animal can think past it. Then you give it a reason to let you closer. She finished the compound late that evening, bottled it into 3 injector rounds for her long-range delivery kit, and went to sleep. The second day, she went back to the ridge. Alone this time, she had been very clear with Brevik about the no soldiers condition, and this time he had not argued. Yoon was with her, which she had come to think of as simply the correct arrangement. He knew the land. He was calm. He did not panic. They found a position on the ridge with a clear sight line to the basin. Grath was already there, doing its slow circling. Nora watched for 40 minutes before she moved. She came down off the ridge slowly. Not sneaking, Grath would sense the attempt to hide and read it as threat behavior. She just walked at a pace that was deliberate and unhurried. No direct eye contact. Body turned slightly sideways to reduce her profile. Every few steps, she would stop completely, let Grath's attention adjust, and then move again. Grath saw her almost immediately. The head came up. The body oriented toward her. Nora stopped. Stood. Let look. A minute passed. 2. Grath in charge. It watched her, the way it had watched her from below the ridge. That same focused, calculating attention. She moved again. Stopped again. Moved again. It took 40 minutes to close from the base of the ridge to a range of 120 meters. By then, Nora's legs ached from the careful, slow movement, and the back of her shirt was damp with sweat. But Grath had not moved aggressively. It had shifted twice to keep her in its line of sight, but that was orientation, not aggression. There was a difference, and she knew at 120 meters, she had a clean delivery shot. She raised the long-range injector slowly, making no sudden movements. Grath's eyes tracked the object in her hands. She aimed for the thick muscle mass of the right hindquarter, away from the already damaged left shoulder, away from the spine implants, into tissue that was dense enough to absorb the compound cleanly. She fired. The injector was nearly silent. A soft pressurized release. Grath reacted to the contact, swung its head toward the hindquarter, snorted, took 2 fast steps sideways. Nora stayed completely still. Then she sat down on the ground. This was the part that was hard to explain to people who hadn't worked with large animals. Sitting down was important. It changed the shape of the interaction. It said, I am not a threat. I am not leaving. I'm just here. Grath stood 30 meters away and watched her sit down in the dirt. She started talking. Nothing meaningful. It didn't matter what the words were. The tone was what mattered. Low, steady, unhurried. The same voice she used in surgical recovery, when a large animal came out of sedation confused and scared and needed to hear something calm before it understood where it was. You've been carrying this a long time, she said. I know you don't understand me. That's fine. I'm going to sit here for a while. The compound would take 15 minutes to reach full effect. She kept talking, kept her voice level, did not make direct eye contact, but didn't look away entirely either. She kept Grath in her peripheral field and watched the subtle signs. The 12-minute mark the shoulder dropped slightly. Just a fraction. The constant micro-tension that had been visible in Grath's posture since she first saw the footage, a low-grade brace against permanent pain, eased a little. Grath took a step toward her, then another. Nora kept talking. Did not move. Grath stopped 8 meters away. The smell hit her, heavy, warm, like iron and old grass, and something chemical underneath. Up close, the scale of the creature was something her brain kept trying to recalculate and failing. The head alone was larger than most vehicles she had worked around, and the eyes at this distance were absolutely unmistakable. Dark, yes. Old, yes. But not empty. Grath lowered its head slowly. Not an attack motion. She knew what that looked like. It was the posture of an animal that was, for the first time in a very long time, feeling slightly less terrible and was trying to figure out why. Nora slowly raised one hand and held it still in the air between them. Grath's nose moved. The breath came out warm against her palm. She held very still and let the moment exist. Behind her, 2 kilometers away in the command tent, Yoon was watching the long-range feed. He had both hands over his mouth. Dale was standing very still beside him. Even Brevik had stopped typing on screen. The tiny figure of a woman sat in the dirt in front of a 12-meter war beast, hand raised, completely calm. Nobody said anything. There was nothing to say. Trust with a large animal is not a door you open once. It is a door you open a little each day, and if you push too hard or move too fast, it closes again, sometimes permanently. Nora knew this. She had learned it the slow way, over years, with animals that could not tell her she was moving too fast, but would show her clearly anyway. So after the first contact, she did not try to immediately do more. She came back the next day and sat in the same spot and talked in the same tone. The day after that, she moved a little closer before sitting. Each day, she asked for slightly less distance, and each day, Grath allowed it.b why the fourth day Grath was lying down when she arrived, watching her approach from the ground. A relaxed posture, or as close to relaxed as a creature carrying that much internal damage could manage. To be why the fifth day, she was close enough to touch the right flank. She started the external examination that day, working slowly and without any quick movements. Her hands moved across the hide in the same systematic way she had used on every large animal she had ever treated. Not random, not hesitant, a clear, deliberate pattern that the animal could learn to anticipate and therefore not be surprised by. The hide was harder than it looked, dense and layered. In some places it was smooth, in others deeply scarred. She found the outline of several implant masses just below the surface. She could feel them through the skin, rigid and foreign. Two near the upper spine, one at the base of the neck, and a shoulder one, the bad one, which Grath reacted to even at a light touch. A low rumble in the chest, a tension through the whole left side. "I know," Nora said. "I'm not going to touch it yet. Just finding it." She ordered materials that evening. The council transport delivered them the next morning without question. Dale had apparently told them to fill her requests immediately and without asking why. She appreciated that more than she said. The tools she needed were not medical instruments in any alien sense of the word. They were modified versions of things she had built and rebuilt over a career of working on animals that no standard medical supply catalog had equipment for. Extraction tools for embedded objects in deep tissue. Long-handled instruments that let her work from a slight distance when needed. Cleaning solutions she had reformulated for the biology she was working with. On the seventh day, she began. The smallest of the spinal implants was the starting point. Not the worst one, but one that her scans showed was infected and actively inflaming the surrounding tissue. Reach the infected one first. Reduce the total pain load. Build tolerance before she touched the shoulder. She administered a local compound to the area first. Not full numbing. She needed Grath to stay still, not sedated, and the compound she was using was calibrated to reduce sharp pain response without removing sensation entirely. And she worked. Grath made sounds the entire time. The low chest rumble she had come to recognize as pain vocalization. A few sharper sounds when she had to work deeper. Once it lifted its head suddenly, and she stopped moving and talked steadily until it settled again. It took 2 hours. The implant came out in pieces. It had already partially fragmented, and the pieces had to be located and removed individually. She cleaned the site, treated the infection with what she had available, and packed it carefully. When she finished and moved back to her usual sitting position, Grath turned its head and looked at her for a long time. Then it exhaled a long, slow breath and laid its head back on the ground. "Yeah," Nora said. "I know. Give it a day." She came back the next morning and Grath was already oriented toward her arrival. It was not imagination. She had seen the drone footage from the command post, and Grath had been watching the direction she always came from for an hour before she arrived. Day 9, second implant. Day 11, third. Each time she learned more about how Grath's modified biology responded, adjusted her compounds and her technique, and each time the work went slightly faster. The shoulder was last. She had been preparing for it since day 1 because she knew it was the hardest one, not just technically, but in terms of what it would take from Grath to tolerate it. The fragment was deep. Getting it out meant working in a way that would hurt before it helped, and she could not fully explain to her patient what was coming or why it was necessary. She sat with Grath for a long time before she started. Just sitting. Just the low, steady voice. "This one is going to be worse," she said. "I'm sorry. But when it's done, it's done." She worked for 3 hours. Grath went still twice in a way that frightened her. A full-body tension, a silence after the vocalizations that she recognized as an animal right at the edge of its tolerance. Both times she stopped completely and waited, and both times Grath came back from the edge and let her continue. The fragment came out toward the end of the third hour. She felt the resistance give, and then it was free in the extraction tool, dark and jagged and smaller than she had expected, given how much damage it had caused. She cleaned and closed the sight and sat back. Grath was breathing hard. She was breathing hard. She sat there and let them both recover. After a while, Grath stood up slowly and took 2 steps and then stopped, just standing there. And then it turned its head and looked at its own left shoulder, the way an animal looks at something that has been wrong for a long time and is now slightly different. Nora watched it take another step. The compensation in the stride was still there. 3 years of habit did not vanish overnight. But the sharp edge of the pain response was gone. She could see it in the way the shoulder moved. Not perfect, not healed, but no longer grinding. She wrote in her notes that evening, patient ambulatory, infection sites responding, primary source of chronic pain addressed. Prognosis, good. Then she went to find Yoon because she wanted to tell someone who would actually understand what that meant. In the command tent, Brevik was writing a report of his own. He wrote it carefully and read it back twice before sending IT. IT said, "The human veterinarian has succeeded where military action failed. Recommend immediate follow-up protocol for all remaining Drelkai war beasts. Recommend Dr. Reed lead the team. Recommend we do not make the same mistake twice." He sent it to the council without changing a word. 3 weeks after Nora's transport had landed on Solta 4, the evacuation order was lifted. The first colonists came back in small groups, cautious, staying near the landing area. Nora watched them from the edge of the command post. Families with bags, looking at their colony like they were not quite sure it was safe to believe they were home. Children who had not seen their houses in weeks. Farmers checking the condition of fields they had left in a hurry. The colony administration had agreed to Nora's request without much argument. A buffer zone along the far edge of the water basin, marked with signal posts that transmitted a low-frequency tone that Grath had learned to associate with the boundary. On this side, the colony. On that side, Grath's territory. A narrow strip of agreed ground in between. It was not a permanent solution. Nora had said so clearly in her written recommendation to the council. Grath needed long-term care, regular check-ins, and ideally contact with specialists who understood Vorth biology in more depth than she did. She had included a note that the council's xenobiology archives almost certainly had more Drelkai research buried in them than anyone had bothered to look for, and that someone should look. She had also included a request for a small monitoring station on Solda 4. Staffed, not military. Someone who could watch Grath's health indicators over time and flag problems early. The council had responded to every point with a formal acceptance. It was the fastest she had ever seen a galactic bureaucracy move, and she suspected Brevik's report had something to do with it. On her last day on Solta 4, Nora went to the water basin alone. The light was early and still pale, the heat not yet built up. The plains around the basin were quiet except for the sound of the water and the dry wind through the low grass. She walked the familiar path without thinking about it anymore. She had walked it enough that her feet knew the way. Grath was at the water. Actually drinking this time, deep, steady pulls. The head would lower, drink, lift, breathe, lower again. No circling, no erratic movement. Just a large animal at a water source doing what a large animal at a water source does. Nora sat down on a flat rock at the edge of the basin, a distance away. Close enough to see clearly. Far enough to be respectful. She watched Grath drink and thought about the first time she had seen the 40-second footage in the council's chamber. The creature tearing through the grain depot. Everyone in that room had seen a weapon, a problem, a thing to be stopped. She had seen an animal. That was the whole difference. That was all it had ever been. Grath finished drinking and stood quietly by the water for a while. Then, with a slowness that seemed almost deliberate, it turned its head and found her. The dark eyes settled on her face from across the basin. Nora raised one hand. The same way she had on the first real day, when Graf had breathed warm air against her palm. Graf looked at her for a long moment, then turned back to the water. That was enough. That was everything. She was back at the command post in time for the council address. The session was formal, a full assembly, dozens of species, the kind of gathering that usually involved long speeches from multiple representatives. Dale had warned her it might take hours. IT took less time than expected because when it was Nora's turn to speak, she kept it short. "I'm a veterinarian," she said. "On my planet, that means I spent 20 years learning how to understand patients who can't describe what's wrong, how to read pain in a body that has no way to ask for help, how to offer trust to something that is frightened and hurting and has every reason to refuse it." She paused. "That's not a combat skill. It's not impressive in a military briefing, but it is real, and it works, and I think you already knew that before you called us. You called humanity because you had run out of every option that required the other party to be a problem. We sent a doctor because we looked at your problem and saw a patient." She thanked them for their time and stepped away from the podium. Dale caught up with her in the corridor outside. "There are 7 other confirmed Drelkai Warbeast locations across the outer sectors," he said. "The council has already voted. They want a response team." "I know," Nora said. "I have 2 colleagues of mine, both better than me with this kind of long-term care work. I'll send the council their files." Dale walked with her for a moment. "I want to say, when we first contacted you, when we explained what the situation was, you didn't hesitate." "I hesitated," she said. "I finished my surgery first." He laughed, a short, surprised sound that she had not heard from him before. "Yes, you did." She said goodbye to Yoon at the landing pad. He was going back to his family's farm as soon as the colony gave clearance for the buffer zone sector. He had already talked to the monitoring station team about doing occasional ground-level observations. He had a way of watching that Nora thought was genuinely valuable, and she had said so in her handover notes. Duddy shook her hand. Then he paused and said, "Do you think it knew? That you were trying to help it?" Nora thought about the way Graf had looked at her from across the water that morning. The stillness of it, the patience in it, the fact that it had come back to the same territory where she had spent 2 weeks sitting in the dirt and talking. "I think it knew something changed," she said. "I think that was enough." She boarded the transport. The ramp closed. Below, Solta 4 got smaller through the viewport, the basin, the plains, the small shapes of returning colonists moving through the colony streets. Somewhere in the council archives, a file was being updated. Humanity's species record. The old line in the threat assessment had been debated, revised, and finally replaced. A clerk somewhere had typed in a new entry without fully understanding what it meant, but it would be quoted in a lot of subsequent council documents that IT read. First contact responders. Recommended for non-combat crises involving living subjects. That in the end, that was a reasonable summary of what had happened. An alien warbeast had arrived on a colony world and threatened thousands of lives. The Galactic Council had sent its military. The military had failed. Then humanity had sent a veterinarian, and she had fixed it.